David, here you are. You are an intern at First Baptist Church. You are a third-year MDiv at Duke. Could you tell us a little bit about how you got to Duke, what your religious background is, how you were raised,
Yes,
all that?
of course, yeah. So when I was a kid, I can remember thinking that one day my faith story was going to be like a beautiful line charted, but it's nothing like that at all. I grew up in a Baptist church in Shelby, North Carolina, was at the church every Sunday and Wednesday. Anytime the doors were open, I was there, which is good and bad in a lot of ways. It formed me for the good, and also when you're expected to be at church twice a week, a lot of times you don't want to, and that can have ulterior effects as well. But I grew up in the church, which was great. Was involved in Young Life in middle school and high school, which was very good for me at the time. Having someone else invest in you outside of the church, that was when my faith really became my own. Was in high school through outside things like Young Life. Went to college at UNC Chapel Hill. Spent the first 2 years doing sports writing, covering basketball and football. Thought that's what I wanted to do. Had this huge change. I spent a summer in New Orleans teaching 7th grade history for a summer, and realized that everything that I was doing that 12 weeks made me feel a whole lot better than what I was doing writing stories about how many points people scored and rebounds. And I came back and I took Bart Ehrman's New Testament class, which may not seem like much, but like leading New Testament scholar, and is known for being an agnostic atheist, and people get like famously tripped up in his classes, and it was like the best semester of my life. And I was like, all of these things that I've always wondered are being opened up to me, and I'm fascinated by what I'm talking about, and I'm surely annoyed everybody who I came into contact with, like, how about Mark and Jesus versus the Jesus and John? It was doing all that kind of stuff. And so those two things kind of happened at the same time, where I saw this vocational interest in teaching and being more involved with young people especially, and also this growing interest in kind of the study of the Bible a little bit further than what I had gotten in the church. And so I similarly saw this kind of gap in the academy and the church and what was being taught, and how a lot of my friends were kind of flailing somewhere in between, not really feeling like they had a home in either, and felt like what was being taught in the academy and the religious studies classes couldn't line up with what was being taught in the church. And I felt a call in kind of this divide of like, how can we bridge these two, and how can we make faith real for these people? And so came to divinity school, and since then have really focused on Christian education classes. Been with Dr. Fred Eady every semester so far. We've been keeping it going, and really just trying to become the best potential Christian educator I can be. So that's kind of my faith story in a hurry.
So you say you want to be a Christian educator.
Yeah, I guess.
So for those of us that might not know what that means, does that mean you do want to be a pastor? You don't want to be a pastor? What is actually a Christian educator?
Yeah, I do not feel that I am called to be a pastor.
Yet.
Sure, yes. Leave room for the Holy Spirit, right? I am really interested in kind of the big picture ideas of ways that we do faith formation, starting all the way from children to youth to adults. Right now I'm working on a curriculum, and so like that's the kind of stuff that I really enjoy talking about, is like the ways that we teach formally and informally like have a huge effect on the way we see the world and we act in the world. And I think my formation in the Baptist church, and kind of seeing some of the stuff that was taught to me in Sunday school, how youth ministry was, like I can kind of pinpoint how I got to where I was because of certain things. And so, like, for instance, one thing, and I'm going to answer one question, is like, one of the things that I'm excited about as a Christian educator is this idea of kind of faithful imagination, in the sense that imagination is not something that's usually talked about a lot in context with the church, right? Like, I know that Tammy does godly play, which I was like completely unaware of until I came to divinity school. And I think godly play is like the coolest thing ever. And I wish there was like an adult version of godly play. I think that we a lot of times kind of take what's given to us, go home and do it, and we don't really think a whole lot about what we're being taught and how that's going to affect our lives. And I think that one of the great things about the Baptist Church, the priesthood of all believers, is that we are all to minister in our own ways. And so one of the things I'm excited about with Christian Ed is like, what is one way that you can act what is one way that God is calling you to act responsibly or hospitably or faithfully that only you can do, and trying to instill that kind of question and virtue into Christians through education. So
Okay, that's very interesting. Okay, so there's been lots of talk recently about young people in the church, particularly people in our generation. We talk a lot about how young people are maybe not going to church or unhappy with the church. So, as a young person, you already talked a little bit about some of how Christian education can fit with the church, but what are you excited about in the church at large? And then what would you like to see different in the church?
Yeah, so the one area that I would pinpoint specifically in what I've been studying is creation care and the topic of just how we see ourselves in relation to creation and our neighbors. I got super into Wendell Berry in high school and came to divinity school thinking that I was the only person in the world who knew who Wendell Berry was.
Can you tell us who Wendell Berry is?
Yes, Wendell Berry is a writer, farmer, agrarian, poet, essayist, personal hero, awesome American, award-winning writer from Kentucky. I brought a book to show off too, and it's in my book bag. But I first was introduced to his poetry and was like, wow, this is the best thing I've ever read. Then I was introduced to his fiction and was like, wow, this is the best thing I've ever read. And then it was like, oh, he also writes essays more than anything else. And so I began reading his essays, and he talks a lot about agriculture, like the political ramifications of some of the stuff that's happened over the last 50 years. But he also talks about like Christianity in its relation to creation. And he has kind of a famous line about how the Christian in America is this just as likely as anybody else to murder or desecrate creation. And why is this? Like, if we truly believe that God created the world and that He loves the world, why is it that we treat the world as if it's, as Norman Wars would say, like a warehouse of natural resources that are just for our use? And so, yeah, that's one of my big interesting topics that I think a lot of people our age are very into talking about the environment, right? And that they feel like the church doesn't have really a good answer for how we are to treat the world and how we are to act responsibly in the world. And we do. Like, the Bible is full of this stuff, and we just haven't talked about it. And so whether it's someone like Ellen Davis at Duke Divinity School who talks about kind of a land ethic in the Hebrew Bible, or the words of Jesus, like, it's all there. And I love talking about how we can act humbly in the world, how we need to act as if creation is a gift, because it is, and how we are supposed to act in response to that. And then one thing that's interesting, like talking about practical knowledge, and just in the sense that, to go back to Barry, he has a famous line that, how are we to love our neighbor if we don't know how to mend their fence or keep our poison out of their streams? So there's a lot of stuff that I think the church has room to talk about when it comes to these things, and I'm really excited and hope over the course of the year we can have conversations about here at FBC. Henderson.
Okay, so I have a follow-up question.
Yeah.
Because when we talk about creation care, often I hear the section in Genesis quoted about how it's been given to human beings to subdue the earth in some way. And so, and obviously, like, human beings are rational creatures, and so they, like, we have more authority and agency than potentially animals and nature.
Right.
So what do we do with verses like that one in Genesis about subduing the earth?
Yes.
How do we interpret that?
$1 million question. Like Genesis 1:28, right? The subdue, and then we have Genesis 2:15, which is often translated till and keep, kind of give us two different pictures of what it looks like to be in relation with creation. Ellen Davis has a whole book about it. So it's not a question that you can answer in a couple minutes, but
give us your best shot.
I think that the one of the problems with the language of stewardship, like kind of this idea of we're to subdue the earth when it comes from the Genesis 1 chapter, is that it kind of a lot of people take it to mean that we are the steward in charge of the house and the homeowner is gone, right? And like we are to take control of the possessions, which I think if you read scripture, and I especially point to like Psalm 104, God is clearly active in creation. And to think that we have been left in charge and God is gone, it would be a fatal flaw. And I think it's one that we have done over the past 2,000 years. I think if you look at especially what's happened over the past 100 years, it's pretty clear that the average human acts as if our actions in creation have no repercussions whatsoever. And I think it also comes back to a lot how we feel about salvation, in the sense that, like, if we think that Jesus is coming to save us and we're getting off this planet and nothing else matters, like that has huge ramifications for how we treat the earth. And if we think that we're just going to be souls that float away into the abyss, then that has major ramifications for how we deal with tilling and keeping the earth versus subduing the earth. So I kind of took that question and went a different direction, but it's all good.
Yeah.
So.
Okay, so if we're not souls floating into the abyss, what are we?
Well, what's the our first place is our bodies, right? So we, like, I think that if you read 1 Corinthians 15 and other places, that we need to take more seriously the idea of new heaven and new earth being here, and that like what happens, what our actions are in creation truly matter. And I think one of the texts that we've read in divinity school talks about how the first creation is creation ex nihilo, out of nothing. The creation of the new kingdom, the new heaven, new earth, will be ex vettere, right? Out of what's here, right? And so we have a vested interest in treating creation the way that God would want us to. And I think that the question between how to read Genesis 1:28 and 2:15 is not an easy one, but it's one that we don't really wrestle with much. We just kind of take this idea of like God has given us the right to do whatever we want to. And I would push back and say that it's not as clear cut as that. And if that's not been evident before, hopefully it's evident now with kind of what's going on ecologically in our planet. And so I think just to tie it all up, like we have the resources in the Christian tradition to deal with this. Like Saint Francis of Assisi's feast day was like 3 days ago. Like that's a great place to start. Read some Saint Francis. And then we also have modern day prophets like Wendell Berry who have spoken to this a lot.
So if a person was to read one thing by Wendell Berry that you think would change their life, what would that one thing be?
It's very difficult. My favorite thing Wendell Berry has ever written is a poem. Again, it's in my backpack. I'm so sorry. It's called The Mad Farmer Manifesto. And it's the most beautiful poem I've ever read. And I don't quite have it memorized. But I think that it's one of those things that can kind of paradigm shift. And then hopefully from there you will read more Wendell Berry. And I'd be happy to direct you. Jayber Crow or Hannah Coulter are my two favorite novels. And his essays are endless. So I've got a couple shelves at home. If anybody wants some Wendell Berry, I'm happy to bring and drop off. So
Okay. So Wendell Berry's your person. That's what we know.
Yes.
We know that you care about creation care. What else do we want to know about you?
One thing we could talk about is food. If you want to talk about food ministry and
yes.
kind of how.
Let's talk about food.
We could. I mean,
I think that's a great idea. You're in a class on food right now, food and faith. Yes.
This one I'm in right now is called Charitable Foods, which is really interesting. Yeah.
Okay. So what is one thing that you've learned about the way that food works into our spirituality that might fit the life of the church?
One thing that we've been talking about a lot that I'm really excited about and feel like great passion toward is that this idea of like churches' food ministries right now are mainly compassion based and not necessarily very justice based, and how we need to hold both of those at the same time, in the sense that like we have a real call to feed our neighbors, and we shouldn't not feed our neighbors just because we're focused on justice. But we shouldn't just feed our neighbors and also not worry about the cyclical problems that they are embedded in, that we have a job to help stop. And I think that compassion and justice is not radical. Like it is very present in the Christian and Jewish faith. And so, I think, for instance, over the last 40 years, since like 1970, so I guess it's been 50 years, the price of fruit and vegetables has gone up by 40%. And the price of like low cost fat sugar stuff has gone down 40%. So what happens a lot of times is in our food banks and food pantries and backpack buddies programs, which are all good, we give out those kind of food that just entrench this cycle. And so we have to do more to advocate for food policy. And I think that gets tricky because you get into politics, obviously. And so I know that that could be a fine line to walk. But that's one thing that I've been really inspired by in this class is just kind of this call that the church specifically can live into to both feed but also advocate so that our brothers and sisters who are coming in week after week to the food pantries and the food banks, that we're not just feeding them, but we are looking actively trying to make their lives better and lower food insecurity. Food insecurity in North Carolina is like, it's over the national average. It's huge. My hometown of Shelby, 1 in every 4 children is food insecure, which is just like mind blowing. And I think all the time about like, what would it mean for a city? Like I think about when I go into my city of Shelby, there's a sign that says city or home of the American Legion World Series, right? Like a big deal, like a big deal in Shelby. But like, what if it was like, this is cheesy, but like home of 0% food insecurity? Like as a group, as a county, as a city that is very invested in their children's future, and we love watching them play football on Friday nights and love watching them in the arts and drama. What if we supported them all the way and we're ensuring that not only were they getting fed, but they were getting fed fresh, nutritious, healthy food? Which I don't think that's that much of a radical idea, but it'll take some faithful imagination to kind of bear out some new ways of living responsibly.
So it sounds like, from listening to you, that your interest in education plus creation care plus food injustice, they all seem to be intertwined together.
Yeah.
Is that correct?
Yeah. I hope so at least.
Okay, that's good. That's interesting. How like we might be able to educate in an imaginative way that also connects us to creation, and how we understand creation affects the kind of food that we grow as well.
For sure. Yeah. I think I love the area of those 3 things. I wish I could graduate from divinity school and somebody would give me a job where that's what I got to do. It was like, you will get to write about, talk about those 3 things. I'd be all in. So, but yeah, that's definitely on point.
Okay. Is there anything else you feel like the congregation at First Baptist Church needs to know this about me?
Burning. We should have come up with like 5 hot seat questions.
Oh, we should have.
What would you get from a gas station if you only had $5? That's a good one. Sunflower seeds, just exclusively sunflower.
Seeds? That's
like,
it?
I'm really worried about my long-term health with how much sunflower seeds I eat.
Okay.
I think it can lead to diverticulitis or something like that. I'm very concerned. I eat sunflower seeds at a rapid rate. It's very bad.
Okay, good to know.
Sundrop slushy. For those of you, Sundrop around here, yes. Okay, just making sure. Like Sundrop is a North Carolina delicacy. Quite like Amy and I have talked about previously, liver mush, Cleveland County. So I guess here, I'll say this. If you want to have any discussions about North Carolina food, barbecue, Shelby home to 2 of the best barbecue restaurants in the state, probably the 2 best, but we won't get into that.
Ooh.
So I'm here. I'm very excited to be at church, FBC Henderson this year. Looking forward to getting to meeting you all. Thanks.
Happy to have you. That's it. And I just dropped my pen.